Most people think confidence is something you're born with. Either you have it or you don't. Either you're a good speaker or you stay quiet forever. I used to believe that too. I grew up as the quiet one, the kid who knew what he wanted to say but never said it, the one who replayed conversations in his head hours later thinking, I should have said that differently. When I did speak, my voice felt small. I talked fast. I explained too much, and people didn't interrupt me because they were rude. They interrupted me because my words had no weight. That realization hurt. But it also changed everything, because the truth is this. People don't ignore you because you're not smart enough. They ignore you when they can't feel what you're saying. And feeling doesn't come from volume. It comes from clarity. It comes from calm. It comes from control. For a long time, I tried to fix the wrong thing. I tried to sound more confident. I tried to talk more. I tried to copy louder people, more expressive people. All it did was make me more anxious. What finally changed my communication wasn't learning what to say. It was learning how to carry my words. I learned that authority isn't aggressive. It's grounded. It doesn't rush. It doesn't beg to be heard. I learned that silence, used correctly, speaks louder than noise. That slowing down can make people lean in. That choosing fewer words can make each one land harder. And most importantly, I learned this. Communication is not talent, it's training. No one is born speaking with weight. They build it deliberately, quietly, over time. This audiobook isn't about becoming charismatic overnight. It's not about clever phrases or persuasive tricks. And it's definitely not about talking more. It's about learning how to speak so your words carry presence. So when you talk, people pause, they listen, they remember. Because when your voice has clarity, people feel safe. When your voice is calm, people trust you. And when your voice is controlled, people respect you. That's what speaking with weight really means. If you've ever felt invisible in conversations, if you've ever been talked over, ignored, or misunderstood, if you've ever walked away thinking, I know I could communicate better than this, this is for you. Over the next hour, I'll walk you through the exact principles that transformed the way I speak. Not theory, not hype, but practical shifts that changed how people responded to me at work, in difficult conversations, and in everyday life. You'll learn why slowing down gives you power, why clarity matters more than cleverness, why the pause is one of the strongest tools you have, and how authority is built long before you open your mouth. You don't need to change who you are. You don't need to become louder, sharper, or more dominant. You just need to learn how to let your voice carry weight. Let's begin. Chapter 1. When your voice has no weight, the invisible problem. There is a quiet frustration that doesn't show up on the surface. You know your ideas are solid. You've thought things through, but when you speak, nothing happens. No reaction, no shift in the room. The conversation simply moves on without you. This is what it feels like when your voice has no weight. I know this feeling well. Growing up, I wasn't loud or expressive. I observed more than I spoke, and when I finally did speak, my words landed softly, almost apologetically. People didn't lean in, they leaned away, not because they didn't like me, but because my voice didn't signal certainty. At the time, I thought the problem was confidence. I told myself I needed to be bolder, faster, sharper, but that belief led me in the wrong direction for years. Being heard versus being felt. Here's a truth most people miss. Being heard is not the same as being felt. You can hear noise anywhere. Music in the background, people talking loudly, endless opinions online. None of it carries weight. It fills space, but it doesn't create impact. Weight comes from how something is delivered, not how often it's said. When your voice lacks weight, people subconsciously treat your words as optional. They interrupt you. They multitask while you're speaking. They nod politely and move on. This isn't disrespectful, it's perception. People respond to signals, not intentions. If your voice signals uncertainty, your message feels unstable. If it signals calm control, people slow down and listen. The cost of a weightless voice. When your voice carries no weight, the consequences compound quietly. You hesitate to speak up. You second-guess yourself. You replay conversations later, wishing you had phrased things differently. Over time, you start shrinking your presence, not because you lack ideas, but because sharing them feels pointless. This was one of the most damaging patterns in my life. I wasn't failing because I lacked intelligence or preparation. I was failing because my delivery trained people not to take me seriously. And the worst part is this. After a while, you start believing the same thing. You stop trusting your own voice. Why trying harder makes it worse. Most people respond to this problem by pushing harder. They speak faster, they explain more, they add extra words to prove their point. I did exactly that. Every sentence became longer. Every idea came with a disclaimer. I tried to make sure no one misunderstood me, but all I really did was dilute my message. A voice with no weight often talks too much. Not because it has more to say, but because it's trying to earn permission to exist. Authority doesn't come from effort. It comes from restraint. The moment I understood this, everything began to shift. The role of emotional leakage. One of the main reasons a voice loses weight is emotional leakage. Even when you don't realize it, your emotions travel through your tone, your pacing, and your breath. Anxiety speeds you up. Doubt raises your pitch. Fear makes your sentences trail off. People may not consciously notice these signals, but they feel them. When I listened to recordings of my own voice for the first time, I was shocked. I sounded rushed, uneven, unsettled. My words weren't wrong, but my nervous system was speaking louder than my message. Your voice always reveals your internal state. And unless you train it, that state will lead instead of you. Weight begins with control. The turning point for me was simple but uncomfortable. I stopped focusing on sounding good and started focusing on being controlled. Control of pace, control of breath, control of intention. I learned to finish sentences without softening them. I learned to pause instead of filling silence. I learned to let words land before adding more. At first, it felt unnatural. Silence felt risky. Short sentences felt incomplete. But something unexpected happened. People started listening, not because I was louder, not because I was more expressive, but because my voice stopped signaling uncertainty. Weight is not volume. Weight is stability. A new standard for speaking. If your voice has no weight, it's not a personality flaw. It's not a permanent limitation. It's a skill gap. And like any skill, it can be trained. This chapter isn't here to judge where you are. It's here to name the problem clearly, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. When your voice lacks weight, the world doesn't slow down for you. When it carries weight, people adjust. They pause, they listen, they respond. And that shift begins the moment you decide that your voice deserves control, not urgency. In the next chapter, we'll break one of the biggest myths in communication. The idea that confidence means being loud. Because real confidence doesn't announce itself. It stands still. And when it speaks, people feel it, recognizing yourself in this pattern. As you listen to this, you may recognize moments from your own life. Meetings where you had something valuable to add but stayed silent. Conversations where your input was overlooked. Situations where you spoke yet felt invisible immediately afterward. This experience is more common than people admit. Many thoughtful, capable individuals struggle not because they lack substance, but because their delivery doesn't reflect it. Their voice hasn't been trained to carry their thinking. That gap between what you know and how you sound can quietly erode self-respect. Closing it is not about becoming someone else. It is about aligning your voice with your intent, so your words finally arrive the way you mean them to. This alignment is where real communication power quietly begins. Today, Chapter 2. Confidence is not loudness. For a long time, I believed confidence had a sound. I thought it was loud, fast, and decisive. I thought confident people filled the room with their voices, spoke without hesitation, and never paused long enough for doubt to catch up. So when my voice felt weak, my instinct was simple: speak louder. That instinct made everything worse. When you grow up quiet or reserved, loudness looks like power from the outside. You see people who dominate conversations, interrupt freely, speak with certainty even when they're wrong. They seem respected, they seem influential, and it's easy to assume that volume is the source of their authority. It isn't. Loudness is often just anxiety with more energy. The mistake I kept making: when I first tried to change how I communicated, I focused on projection. I forced my voice to be stronger. I pushed my words out faster. I tried to sound sure even when I didn't feel sure inside. What came out felt unnatural. My chest tightened. My breathing became shallow. My sentences lost structure. I sounded tense, not confident, and people could feel it. Confidence is not something you can fake through force. The harder you try to sound confident, the more you expose the lack of it underneath. This was one of the most important lessons I had to learn. Confidence is not an output problem. It's a state problem. Why loud voices don't create trust. People don't trust loud voices by default. They trust stable ones. A loud voice can feel aggressive, defensive, or insecure. It can trigger resistance instead of respect. We've all experienced this. Someone raises their voice to make a point, and instead of leaning in, you mentally step back. Authority works the opposite way. True authority calms the room. It doesn't compete for attention. It doesn't rush to prove itself. When a voice is grounded, people unconsciously relax. They feel that nothing is being forced, and when nothing is forced, attention becomes voluntary. That's where real influence begins. The internal shift that changed my voice. The breakthrough for me didn't come from practicing speeches or memorizing lines. It came from learning to regulate what was happening inside before I spoke. I realized that my voice was reacting to my emotions instead of leading them. When I felt nervous, my voice sped up. When I felt unsure, my sentences softened. When I wanted approval, my tone asked for permission. None of this was intentional, but it was consistent. Once I became aware of it, I stopped trying to sound confident and started focusing on staying calm. Calm changed everything. Calm is the foundation of confidence. Calm doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean weak. It means controlled. A calm voice comes from a regulated nervous system. When your breathing is steady, your voice naturally drops into a more grounded register. When your mind is clear, your sentences become shorter and more direct. People don't respond to confidence because it's impressive. They respond to it because it feels safe. A calm voice signals that you're not overwhelmed, that you're not reacting, that you're choosing your words deliberately. That signal carries far more weight than volume ever could. Speaking slower than you think you should. One of the hardest habits for me to change was speed. When you're nervous, your body wants to rush. It wants to get the words out quickly before you lose courage or someone interrupts you. But speed drains authority. Slowness, when intentional, creates gravity. The first time I consciously slowed my speech, it felt uncomfortable. I worried people would think I was unsure or unprepared. The opposite happened. People stopped interrupting. They waited. Slowing down gave my words space to land. Confidence lives in that space. The difference between assertive and aggressive. Another misconception I had was that being confident meant being assertive at all costs. saying things strongly, standing my ground aggressively. But assertiveness without calm quickly turns into aggression. Aggression tries to dominate. Assertiveness simply states. The most confident people I've observed don't push their points. They present them and let the silence do the rest of the work. They don't raise their voice when challenged. They lower it. That contrast is powerful. When your voice stays calm under pressure, it sends a clear message. You are not threatened. Letting go of the need to impress, one of the hidden enemies of confidence, is the need to impress. When you want people to like you, approve of you, or validate you, your voice betrays that desire. It becomes performative. It seeks reactions. Real confidence doesn't perform. It expresses. As I let go of trying to sound impressive, my communication became simpler. I stopped adding unnecessary explanations. I trusted that one clear sentence was enough. And surprisingly, that restraint made my words stronger. Confidence as a byproduct, not a goal. Here's what most communication advice gets wrong. It tells you to aim for confidence. Confidence is not something you chase directly. It's a byproduct of clarity, calm, and control. When you know what you want to say, your voice steadies. When you slow down, your body relaxes. When you stop forcing outcomes, your presence strengthens. This is why confidence grows quietly. It's built through repetition, not performance. Redefining confidence for yourself. If you've ever felt that confidence wasn't who you are, this matters. Confidence is not a personality trait reserved for extroverts. It's a skill that anyone can train by learning how to regulate their voice and pace. You don't need to speak louder to be confident. You need to speak steadier. And when your voice stops rushing, stops apologizing, and stops trying to prove itself, something subtle but powerful happens. People start to listen differently. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the foundation of this shift, clarity. Because before your voice can carry authority, your message must be clean. Clear words create calm delivery, and calm delivery creates confidence. Confidence doesn't announce itself. It stands quietly. And when it speaks, it doesn't need to be loud to be heard. Chapter 3. Clarity comes before confidence. Before my voice ever became calm, before it ever carried authority, it had to become clear. This was a difficult truth to accept because I assumed my problem was delivery. I thought if I could just sound better, people would understand me. But clarity doesn't begin in the voice. It begins in the mind. When your thinking is scattered, your speech will be scattered. When your ideas are crowded, your words will rush. And when you're unsure what you're trying to say, your voice will search for permission as it speaks. I lived in that state for years without realizing it. When you talk without knowing your point, there were many times I spoke simply because it felt expected. In meetings, conversations, group settings, I talked my way toward a point instead of starting with one. My sentences wandered. My explanations expanded. By the time I reached something meaningful, the moment had already passed. People weren't confused because the topic was complex. They were confused because I was. Unclear thinking produces unclear speech, and unclear speech trains people to stop listening. This was one of the most uncomfortable realizations of my life. I wasn't being ignored. I was being unclear. Why clarity creates. Authority doesn't come from having the best idea in the room. It comes from expressing one idea cleanly. When someone speaks with clarity, their words feel intentional. There's no excess, no backtracking, no self-correction mid-sentence. That precision signals control, and control creates trust. People trust speakers who sound like they know where they're going. Even if they disagree with the idea, they respect the delivery. Clarity doesn't mean saying everything. It means choosing what matters and letting go of the rest. The habit of over-explaining. One of the biggest clarity killers is over-explaining. I over-explained because I wanted to be understood. I feared being misinterpreted. So I added context, examples, disclaimers, and justifications. Each addition felt helpful, but collectively they weakened my message. Over-explaining sends a subtle signal. I'm not sure this stands on its own. When you trust your point, you state it and stop. When you doubt it, you keep talking. Authority lives in the ability to stop. Thinking before speaking. Clarity requires restraint before you open your mouth. This was a skill I had to practice deliberately. Instead of speaking immediately, I learned to pause internally and ask myself one simple question. What is the point I'm making? Not the topic, not the background. The point. At first, this pause felt awkward. Conversations move quickly, and silence can feel dangerous. But the more I practiced this internal check, the more confident my speech became. Because once the point was clear in my mind, my voice no longer needed to search for it. One idea per sentence. Another shift that changed everything was limiting myself to one idea per sentence. When you stack multiple ideas together, your voice loses structure. Your tone becomes uncertain. Listeners don't know where to focus. Shorter sentences feel riskier, but they carry more weight. They give your words shape. They give listeners something to hold. Clarity is not about simplification for others. It's about discipline for yourself. Clarity reduces anxiety. One unexpected benefit of clear thinking is calm delivery. When you know exactly what you're going to say, your body relaxes, your breathing slows, your voice steadies. Anxiety often comes from uncertainty, not fear. Once I stopped improvising my thoughts out loud, my nervous system stopped panicking. Speaking no longer felt like exposure. It felt like execution. Confidence didn't come from sounding strong. It came from knowing my direction. The power of saying less. The more clarity I developed, the less I needed to say. This felt counterintuitive at first. I worried that saying less would make me seem unhelpful or disengaged. Instead, it made my contributions more noticeable. When you speak less, people pay more attention to when you do speak. This isn't a trick, it's a natural response. Scarcity creates focus. Clear speakers don't dominate conversations, they punctuate them. Letting go of perfect wording. Clarity is not perfection. Another trap I fell into was trying to phrase things flawlessly. I wanted the sentence to sound polished, intelligent, and precise. That pursuit slowed me down and created hesitation. Clear speech doesn't require perfect wording. It requires honest intent. When your intent is clear, your words will organize themselves. They may not be elegant, but they will be understood. And understanding matters more than elegance. Training clarity and private clarity is built away from the moment of speaking. I started training by writing my thoughts down before important conversations. Not scripts, just bullet points. One idea, one sentence, one purpose. Over time, this habit rewired how I thought. My mind became less cluttered. My speech followed. Clear thinking is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Why clarity changes how people treat you. Once your speech becomes clear, people respond differently. They stop interrupting. They stop asking for clarification. They stop filling in the gaps for you. They listen. Clarity removes friction from communication. It makes interaction feel easy. And people gravitate toward what feels easy and certain. This is where authority quietly forms. Not through dominance, not through volume, but through precision. The foundation of speaking with weight. If your voice feels light, start with your thinking. Before you work on tone, pacing, or presence, clean your message. Decide what matters. Say only that. Let silence handle the rest. Clarity is the first layer of weight. Without it, confidence collapses into noise. With it, even a soft voice can carry authority. In the next chapter, we'll explore the tool that amplifies clarity more than any other: the pause. Because once your words are clean, how you space them determines how deeply they land. Chapter 4. The pause that gives your words gravity. The moment my communication truly changed wasn't when I learned a better sentence. It was when I learned to stop talking. That sounds simple, almost insignificant. But learning how to pause, intentionally, comfortably, without panic, was one of the most difficult and transformative skills I ever developed. Because silence exposes you. When you stop talking, there's nothing to hide behind. No extra words, no filler, no momentum to carry you forward. Just you, your presence, and the space you've created. For someone who grew up afraid of being ignored, that space felt terrifying. Why silence feels so dangerous. Most people rush through speech not because they have too much to say, but because they're afraid of what happens when they stop. Silence feels like loss of control. It feels like an opening for judgment, interruption, or rejection. So we fill it instinctively. I used to treat silence like an emergency. The moment I sensed a gap, I rushed to close it. I added clarifications. I softened statements. I explained myself again, just in case. What I didn't realize was that every time I did that, I drained my words of weight. Silence doesn't weaken your message. It frames it. The first time I let a pause hang, I remember the first time I forced myself to pause after making a point. It was in a conversation where I would normally rush to justify myself. Instead, I stopped. 1 second passed, then another. No one jumped in. No one challenged me. They waited. That moment rewired something in me. I realized that people weren't waiting for more information. They were waiting to see if I believed what I had just said. The pause answered that question better than any explanation ever could. What a pause communicates. A pause sends powerful signals. Even when you say nothing, it says, "I'm not nervous. I'm not rushing. I'm comfortable here." These signals register instantly. They bypass logic and speak directly to perception. When your voice stops calmly instead of collapsing into filler, people sense stability. And stability is authority. You don't need to announce confidence. You demonstrate it through restraint. The difference between empty silence and intentional pause. Not all silence carries weight. There's a difference between silence that feels awkward and silence that feels deliberate. Awkward silence comes from uncertainty. Intentional pause comes from control. The difference isn't time, it's posture, internally and externally. When you pause intentionally, your body stays open, your breath stays steady, your eyes stay engaged. You're not retreating, you're holding space. That kind of pause makes people lean in mentally, even if they don't realize it. Why pausing strengthens your voice. Your voice doesn't only speak through sound, it speaks through timing. When you pause after an important idea, you allow it to settle. You give listeners time to process instead of overwhelming them with the next thought. This is where gravity forms. Words without pauses slide past people. Words surrounded by spaceland. Once I understood this, I started using pauses strategically, not as hesitation, but as punctuation. Pausing before you speak. The most powerful pause happens before you say anything at all. When someone asks you a question, your instinct may be to answer immediately, but instant responses often sound reactive. They suggest that your voice is being pulled by the situation instead of guided by you. Pausing before you speak changes that dynamic. It signals that you're choosing your words, not spilling them. It slows the emotional temperature of the interaction. It gives your nervous system time to align with your intent. That brief pause, sometimes no more than a breath, creates authority before a single word is spoken. Learning to trust the space. Trusting silence requires a mindset shift. You have to stop seeing silence as something to fix and start seeing it as something to use. This took practice for me. I started small. I paused at the end of sentences, then after key points, then before answering questions. Each time I resisted the urge to fill the space. Nothing bad happened. In fact, the opposite happened. People listened more carefully. Conversations slowed down. My words felt heavier, more grounded. Silence stopped being an enemy. It became an ally. When pauses feel uncomfortable, even now, pauses can feel uncomfortable at times. That discomfort doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're retraining your instincts. The urge to rush is often the voice of insecurity trying to regain control. When you pause through that urge instead of obeying it, you weaken the habit. Over time, silence stops triggering anxiety. It starts feeling natural. And when silence feels natural, it becomes powerful. The pause is a test of belief. There's an important rule I follow now. If I can't pause after a statement, I probably don't fully believe it. Pausing tests your conviction. If your words need immediate reinforcement, they are not stable yet. But when you can let them stand alone, without defense, you communicate belief without saying so. That belief is contagious. People respond to it intuitively. Using pauses to command attention. One of the most overlooked uses of pausing is attention control. When you speak continuously, listeners drift. When you pause unexpectedly, they re-engage. Their minds reset. Their focus returns. Pauses act like markers in the flow of conversation. They tell the listener, this matters. You don't need dramatic pauses. You need consistent ones. Short, calm, intentional. Making silence. Part of your identity. Speaking with weight isn't about mastering one technique. It's about adopting a different relationship with time. When you stop racing the moment, you stop sounding like you're chasing approval. You start sounding like you belong where you are. Silence reinforces that belonging. It says you're not afraid of being seen, you're not afraid of being heard, and you're not afraid of being still. That stillness gives your words gravity. In the next chapter, we'll address another subtle force that undermines authority: weak language. Because even with calm delivery and well-placed pauses, certain words can quietly drain the power from your voice before your message ever lands. Chapter 5. Cut weak language. Long before I learned how to control my pace or use silence, there was another force quietly undermining my voice. It wasn't volume, it wasn't speed, it was language. Specifically, weak language. These were small words and phrases that slipped into my speech without permission. They sounded polite. They sounded reasonable. But together, they drained authority from everything I said. I didn't notice them at first. Most people don't. Weak language hides in plain sight. The invisible apology. Weak language often sounds like courtesy, but it functions like an apology. Phrases like "I think," "maybe," "just," or "kind of" soften your message before it ever reaches the listener. They suggest uncertainty even when your idea is solid. I use these phrases constantly, not because I doubted my ideas, but because I didn't want to seem pushy or arrogant. I wanted to sound agreeable. What I didn't realize was that I was training people to treat my words as optional. When you preface a statement with doubt, listeners respond with doubt. They don't push back. They simply disengage. Why weak language feels safe? Weak language feels safe because it lowers the risk of conflict. It creates distance between you and your message. If someone disagrees, you can retreat easily. But safety comes at a cost. Every time you soften a statement unnecessarily, you trade clarity for comfort. Over time, this habit becomes your default voice, and that voice carries very little weight. Authority requires the courage to stand behind your words. The words that drain authority. Some words consistently weaken speech, especially when overused. "I think" turns a statement into an opinion even when you're stating a fact. "Maybe" introduces doubt before anyone asked for it. "Just" minimizes your contribution, kind of blurs your meaning. These words don't make you polite. They make you unclear. Once I became aware of them, I heard them everywhere. In my own voice, in meetings, in conversations. I realized how much power they silently removed. Saying what you mean. Cleanly cutting weak language doesn't mean becoming blunt or rude. It means being precise. Instead of, "I think this could work," say, "This will work because." Instead of, "Maybe we should consider," say, "We should consider." Instead of, "I just wanted to add," say, "I want to add." The difference is subtle, but the effect is immediate. When you remove verbal cushions, your voice stands on its own. The fear behind softening. The real reason we soften our language isn't politeness, it's fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being judged. Fear of being seen. Weak language is often a shield. It allows you to speak without fully committing, but authority requires commitment. When you state something clearly, you take responsibility for it. That responsibility is what gives your voice weight. Learning to own your statements. The first time I consciously removed weak language, it felt uncomfortable. My sentences felt exposed, almost too direct. I worried people would push back harder. They didn't. What actually happened was surprising. People responded more seriously, they asked better questions, they treated my input as something to engage with, not something to politely ignore. Owning your statements invites real conversation. Precision over politeness. There's a difference between being respectful and being vague. Respect comes from tone, not from uncertainty. You can speak clearly and still be considerate. In fact, clarity is often the most respectful thing you can offer. When people know exactly what you mean, they don't have to guess. They don't have to interpret. They don't have to fill in gaps. Precision reduces friction. Weak language and self-trust. One of the most damaging effects of weak language is internal. When you repeatedly soften your words, you begin to internalize that softness. You start doubting ideas you once believed in. You hesitate more. Your internal voice becomes cautious, even when it doesn't need to be. Strong language reinforces self-trust. Every clear statement you make strengthens the belief that your voice matters. This isn't about ego, it's about alignment. Practicing stronger language. I started practicing by editing my own speech mentally, not obsessively, but attentively. When I noticed myself adding unnecessary softness, I paused and removed it. At first, this slowed me down, but over time it became natural. The goal isn't to eliminate every soft word, it's to remove the ones that serve no purpose. When softness is intentional, it's a choice. When it's habitual, it's a weakness. Letting your words stand. The true test of strong language is what you do after you speak. When you cut weak language, you must also resist the urge to immediately explain or justify. Let the statement stand. Trust it. Silence after a strong statement amplifies its impact. This is where the work from the previous chapters comes together. Clear thinking, calm delivery, intentional pauses, strong language. Each supports the other. Rewriting your voice. Changing your language changes how people perceive you, but more importantly, it changes how you perceive yourself. Your voice becomes firmer, your thoughts become cleaner, your presence becomes steadier. You don't need to sound aggressive to be authoritative. You need to sound certain. That certainty is communicated through words that don't apologize for existing. In the next chapter, we'll we'll focus on one of the most practical tools for reinforcing authority in real time: slowing down your speech, because even strong words lose power when they're rushed. Chapter 6. Speak slower than you feel. One of the simplest changes I ever made to my communication was also one of the hardest. I slowed down, not a little, not occasionally, consistently. At first, it felt wrong, almost irresponsible, like I was leaving something unfinished in the air. But that discomfort was exactly the signal that told me this was the habit I needed most. Because speed was never helping me, it was exposing me. Why we rush when we speak. Most people speak quickly for the same reason they use weak language and avoid pauses. Fear. Fear of being interrupted. Fear of sounding unsure. Fear of losing the moment. When you're nervous, your body wants to escape. Your voice speeds up because it's trying to get through the situation as fast as possible. The faster you speak, the sooner you can stop. But authority doesn't rush to the end. It stays present. I didn't realize how much my speech was driven by anxiety until I listened to recordings of myself. Even when I knew what I wanted to say, I spoke as if I was late. That urgency drained weight from every sentence. Speed signals instability. Listeners may not consciously notice speed, but they feel it. Fast speech signals pressure. It suggests that something is unstable or unresolved. It gives the impression that the speaker is reacting instead of choosing. Slow speech, on the other hand, signals control. When someone speaks slowly, you assume they're comfortable, that they're not afraid of the response, that they trust their words enough to give them time. This perception happens instantly, before logic has a chance to intervene. Slowness is not hesitation. One of the biggest misconceptions about slow speech is that it sounds hesitant. It doesn't when done correctly. Hesitation is irregular. Slowness is steady. A hesitant voice speeds up and slows down unpredictably. It trails off. It corrects itself. A slow voice is consistent. It moves forward deliberately. The difference is intention. Once I learned to speak slowly on purpose, my voice stopped sounding unsure. It sounded grounded. Breathing changes everything. The foundation of slow speech is breath. When you're anxious, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid. That forces your voice to ride on short bursts of air, which speeds everything up. You're not speaking from your body, you're speaking from your chest. I began practicing one simple shift. I slowed my breathing before I spoke. Not dramatically, just enough to feel my breath settle lower. That alone changed my pace. A steady breath creates a steady voice. A steady voice creates a calm presence. Speaking slower than feels natural. Here's the rule that made the biggest difference for me. Speak slower than feels natural. Your internal sense of normal speed is calibrated by your habits. If you've been rushing for years, your baseline is already too fast. When I first slowed down to what felt almost exaggerated, listeners experienced it as calm and clear. What felt slow to me felt comfortable to them. Your perception is not the listener's perception. The emotional effect of slowing down. Slowing your speech doesn't just change how others experience you, it changes how you experience yourself. When you slow down, your nervous system receives a message. There is no threat. You're not being chased. You're not under pressure. That message reduces anxiety in real time. Over time, I noticed that slowing my voice prevented anxiety from escalating in the first place. Instead of trying to calm myself down after speaking, I stayed calm while speaking. That shift was profound. Letting words land. When you speak slowly, each word has time to land. Listeners can follow your thinking. They don't have to work to keep up. That ease builds trust, and trust is the gateway to authority. Fast speech forces listeners to chase your meaning. Slow speech invites them to walk with you. Once I felt that difference, I never wanted to rush again. Resisting the urge to speed up. There are moments when the urge to speed up returns. Challenging questions, tense conversations, disagreement. These moments are where slow speech matters most. When you feel pressure rising, slowing down feels counterintuitive. But that's exactly when it's most powerful. It creates contrast. It shifts the dynamic. Instead of being pulled into urgency, you become the calm center. People respond to that instantly. Practicing slowness without sounding artificial. Slowing down doesn't mean dragging out words or speaking unnaturally. It means reducing unnecessary speed. I practiced by focusing on transitions. I slowed down at the beginning of sentences. I allowed full stops at the end. I resisted stacking ideas. The goal wasn't to sound slow, it was to sound deliberate. Deliberateness is the essence of authority. When slowness becomes your signature, over time, slow speech stopped feeling like a technique. It became part of my presence. People began describing my voice differently. Calm, clear, thoughtful. None of those words had ever been used before, and nothing about my personality had changed, only my pace. That's when I understood something important. Authority is often a pacing decision. Slowing down is an act of respect. There's one more layer to this that matters. When you slow down, you show respect for your own words, and people mirror that respect back to you. You're signaling that what you're saying deserves time, that it's not disposable, that it's worth considering. That signal carries weight. In the next chapter, we'll move away from real-time techniques and look at what happens behind the scenes. Because speaking with authority in public is built through discipline in private. And the way you train your voice when no one is listening determines how it performs when everyone is. Chapter 7. Authority is built in private. Most people believe authority is something you perform in public, on stage, in meetings, in important conversations. That belief is backwards. Authority is not created the moment you speak. It is revealed there. What people hear in your voice is the result of habits you've built when no one was listening. The illusion of natural speakers. For a long time, I assumed some people were simply born with a strong voice. They sounded composed without effort. Their words landed cleanly. They didn't rush or stumble. I told myself they were different from me. What I later learned was uncomfortable but liberating. They weren't different. They were trained. Not formally, not dramatically, quietly. They had spent time hearing themselves speak, adjusting, correcting, becoming familiar with their own voice instead of afraid of it. Authority doesn't come from talent, it comes from exposure. Why public practice isn't enough. Many people try to improve communication only in real situations. They speak more in meetings, they volunteer to present. They practice by being observed. This is the hardest and least effective way to train. When you're in public, your nervous system is already activated. You're managing reactions, expressions, and outcomes. There's very little room for refinement. Real training requires safety. Privacy provides that safety. When you practice alone, there's no pressure to perform, no one to impress, no consequences. You can slow down, experiment, and notice what actually needs work. That's where authority begins. Hearing yourself. Honestly, the first private habit that changed my voice was recording it. At first, I hated it. I didn't like how I sounded. I noticed tension, speed, and uncertainty. It was uncomfortable to confront the gap between how I thought I sounded and how I actually sounded. But discomfort is data. By listening without judgment, I started hearing patterns, where I rushed, where my voice rose at the end of sentences, where I softened statements unnecessarily. You can't correct what you refuse to hear. Training without an audience. Once I accepted my real voice, training became practical. I practiced reading out loud, slowly, clearly, I focused on finishing sentences without fading. I practiced pausing without filling the space. Sometimes I repeated the same paragraph multiple times, changing only one variable: pace, emphasis, or breath. This wasn't about perfection. It was about familiarity. The more familiar I became with my voice, the less anxious I felt using it in public. Repetition builds stability. Authority is not intensity, it's consistency. When you repeat a behavior privately, it becomes automatic publicly. You don't have to think about slowing down. You don't have to remember to pause. Your body does it for you. This is how confidence becomes quiet. The goal isn't to remember techniques while speaking. The goal is to embody them so fully that they don't require thought. That embodiment only comes through repetition. Practicing calm on purpose. One of the most powerful private practices I developed was speaking calmly even when there was no reason to. I would narrate simple thoughts out loud. Describe what I was doing. State ideas slowly and clearly. This might sound unnecessary, but it trained my nervous system to associate speaking with calm, not urgency. So when real conversations happened, my voice returned to that baseline automatically. Calm became my default. Training when no one is watching. There's a reason this work feels unglamorous. There's no applause, no feedback, no validation. But that's also why it works. When you train privately, your motivation shifts. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're building alignment between your thoughts and your voice. That alignment is what people later interpret as authority. They don't know why you sound grounded. They just know that you do. The integrity of private standards. One of the most important shifts I made was raising my standards in private. I stopped letting myself rush through sentences when alone. I stopped ignoring weak phrasing in my own speech. I treated my voice with the same respect whether anyone was listening or not. That integrity mattered. Because the voice you use when no one is around is the voice that shows up under pressure. Authority without performance. The greatest benefit of private training is that authority stops feeling like an act. You're no longer trying to sound confident. You're simply speaking the way you've practiced. That removes tension. You don't monitor yourself constantly. You don't worry about how you're coming across. You trust your habits, and that trust is audible. Why this changes how people respond. People respond differently to someone who isn't performing. They sense authenticity. They sense stability. They sense that nothing is being forced. That response isn't conscious. It's instinctive. Authority built in private doesn't ask for recognition. It naturally receives it. Building a private practice. You don't need hours a day. You need consistency, a few minutes of deliberate speaking, recording and listening occasionally, correcting one habit at a time. This quiet work compounds, and one day you realize something important. You're no longer trying to manage your voice. It carries itself. The final layer of weight. In the next chapter, we'll bring everything together, not as techniques, but as a new identity. Because speaking with weight isn't about what you do. It's about who you become when your voice is no longer something you fear. Authority isn't built in front of people. It's built when you're alone, deciding how seriously you take your own words. Chapter 8. Speak with weight. There comes a point when speaking well stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like identity. This chapter is about that shift. Not the moment you learn another technique, but the moment you stop thinking about techniques at all. When clarity, calm, and control stop being things you do and become how you show up. That is what it means to speak with weight, when you stop trying to be heard. Early on, my goal in every conversation was simple. Be heard. That goal created tension. It made me monitor reactions. It made me chase validation. And it made my voice dependent on how others responded. Everything changed when I let that goal go. When you stop trying to be heard, you start speaking from a different place. You speak because you have something to say, not because you need a response. That shift alone increases authority. People can feel when your voice isn't asking for permission. Weight is internal. First, weight doesn't come from your tone alone. It comes from alignment. Alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you say. When those three are connected, your voice stabilizes naturally. There's no internal conflict pulling it in different directions. You're not editing yourself in real time. That internal stillness is audible, and it's rare. The end of over-adjustment. One of the signs that you've begun speaking with weight is that you stop adjusting mid-sentence. You don't change direction to please the room. You don't soften to avoid disagreement. You don't rush to fill the silence. You state your thought and let it exist. That doesn't mean you're rigid. It means you're grounded. Grounded voices invite engagement without chasing it. Respect without demand. Authority doesn't demand respect. It attracts them. When you speak with weight, people listen, not because they're forced to, but because it feels natural to. They sense boundaries in your voice. They sense that you're not trying to dominate or impress. You're simply present. That presence sets a tone others adapt to. How conversations change. As your voice gains weight, conversations change subtly. People interrupt you less. They wait for you to finish. They respond more thoughtfully. Not because you've asked them to, but because your pacing and clarity set the rhythm. You become a reference point instead of a participant competing for airtime. Speaking less, meaning more. One of the most unexpected outcomes of speaking with weight is how little you need to say. Because when your words are clear and deliberate, you don't need volume or repetition. You choose your moments. You speak when it matters, and when you do, your voice lands. This restraint doesn't make you invisible. It makes you memorable. Weight under pressure. The true test of this identity comes under pressure. Disagreement, conflict, unexpected questions. This is where all the quiet training reveals itself. When others rush, you slow down. When emotions rise, your voice stays even. When the moment demands a reaction, you choose a response. That contrast is powerful. People may not remember what you said, but they will remember how you held yourself. Letting go of the old self, there is a moment, often unnoticed, when the old version of you stops showing up. The one who rushed, the one who over-explained, the one who softened every statement. You don't consciously decide to abandon that version. You simply outgrow it. Your voice no longer reflects fear or urgency. It reflects clarity and intention. That's growth. Weight as a daily choice. Speaking with weight isn't something you achieve once and keep forever. It's a daily choice. A choice to slow down, a choice to speak clearly, a choice to let silence work. Some days will be easier than others. That doesn't mean you've lost progress. It means you're human. The difference now is that you know how to return to the center. The quiet confidence of control. At its core, speaking with weight is about control, not over others, but over yourself. Control of your pace, control of your language, control of your response. That control creates freedom. You're no longer pulled by the moment. You shape it. Becoming someone. Others listen to people, listen to those who sound settled. Not perfect, not dominant, settled. When your voice is settled, others feel grounded in your presence. Conversations become clearer. Decisions become easier. Conflict becomes manageable. This is the influence most people seek, without realizing it. Carrying this forward. You don't need to announce this change. You don't need to explain it. Just speak. Speak with clarity. Speak with calm. Speak with control. Let your voice do the work. Because when your words carry weight, you don't need to raise them. You simply let them land. And that is how communication becomes authority. If there is one idea to carry forward from this audiobook, it is this. Your voice is not a reflection of your personality. It is a reflection of your training. For a long time, I believed my quiet nature meant I was destined to stay unheard. I assumed confidence belonged to louder people, faster thinkers, more dominant personalities. What I eventually learned is that confidence, authority, and clarity are not traits you're born with. They are behaviors you practice. Nothing in this journey required me to become someone else. I didn't need to change my values, my temperament, or my character. I needed to change how I related to my own voice. When I stopped rushing, my thoughts slowed with me. When I cut weak language, my self-trust strengthened. When I learned to pause, my words began to land. These changes didn't happen overnight. They happened quietly, through repetition and awareness. But their impact was unmistakable. Speaking with weight is not about dominating conversations or proving intelligence. It is about alignment. Alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you say. When those elements move together, your voice becomes steady. And when your voice is steady, people listen. You don't need to fill every silence. You don't need to justify every statement. You don't need to compete for attention. Your presence does more work than your volume ever could. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Clarity comes before confidence. When your message is clear, your voice settles naturally. When your voice settles, authority emerges without effort. From this point forward, treat your voice with intention. Slow it down. Choose your words carefully. Let silence support you instead of fearing it. Practice when no one is listening, so you can be grounded when everyone is. There will be moments when old habits return, when pressure makes you rush, when insecurity tempts you to soften your word. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human. The difference now is awareness, and awareness gives you choice. Each conversation becomes an opportunity to reinforce the identity you're building, not through performance, but through consistency. You don't need a louder world. You don't need to speak more. You need a voice that carries weight. When you speak with clarity, people understand. When you speak with calm, people trust. When you speak with control, people respect. That is the power you've been training throughout this audiobook. Take it with you. Practice it quietly. Let it shape how you show up. And when you speak next, don't rush. Don't soften. Don't chase. Just speak. Let your words carry weight.